know me, my name is and this is my last reflection as part of my internship. And it has been just a privilege to be here. And I really especially want to thank Erin for her wisdom and her leadership. And I also, of course, want to thank this lay internship team that has provided support. So Glenn and Marike and Carol and Keith. And I especially want to thank this congregation. I never, ever, ever thought that I would be up here. This wasn't what I ever envisioned for myself. So to be in a space that has allowed me to share a message, to be warm and welcoming, but also receptive to some very challenging messages, has been a great gift, and I thank you. Let us pray. Gracious God, we know that your Spirit is always present, and yet in our busyness and self-focus, we forget to remember your presence. And so we come into this sacred space to quiet ourselves and to open ourselves, to allow ourselves to be even vulnerable to your grace and to listen to your voice that speaks of a longing for us to know abundant life. Amen. If you were watching the CBS Nightly News on Friday, you might have heard this story. It's a story that took place in my hometown of Corpus Christi, Texas, at a high school that I took driver's ed in many years ago. Little had changed. It was a school like most public high schools where there are the in kids and the out kids. And in this story, there were two kids nominated for prom king. Tyrell, a black football player, was the most popular kid at school. Adam, on the other hand, had significant social delays, and at the bottom of the social ladder was often bullied and ridiculed. Adam admitted to the reporter that he thought they were messing with him when they nominated him, and yes, he felt vulnerable. But he decided to go to the prom anyway. As these two students stood side by side, as would be expected, the football player was crowned. I'm sure that there was snickering in the crowd. I mean, he was Adam even to be standing there. What a joke, right? Of course, Tyrell felt a surge of pride at being selected, but not for long. He glanced over at Adam, who looked sad, heartbroken actually. So he did what only a person listening to the voice of the Good Shepherd would do. He walked over to Adam and he told him that they had picked the wrong man. He took the crown off of his own head and he placed it on Adam's head and slightly bowed. What had been snickering or simply disregard suddenly turned into applause. Life at school for Adam changed. Through Tyrell's small but courageous action, Tyrell, Adam, and the school tasted abundant life. That story is beautiful, but it's somewhat painful for me. See, it brings back memories of being in high school art class almost 40 years ago. This time, it was a large black girl who sat at the table with me and another, who was the bully. The scrawny little girl with glasses who sat with us was likely considered a nerd when people were being nice. This bully would take her pencil, tear her paper, and even broke her glasses. No teacher would intervene, and I dared not say anything because I knew what that would mean to me. In the language of our gospel story today, I was not listening to the Good Shepherd, but thieves of abundant life, thieves known as fear and self-interest. 40 years later, I can still see this little girl's face as clearly as if it was yesterday. Her face reminds me today that survival at another's cost does not bring abundant life. In our gospel reading today, we have the story of the Good Shepherd. Jesus says that he has come so that his sheep, all of us, may have life and have it more abundantly. This is not talking about mere survival, but a life of meaning, purpose, a life of connection, where we are accepted and valued. Isn't that what everyone longs for? A real desire to be deeply seen and accepted, to belong. Looking at the passage from John a little closer, the first problem we encounter is that Jesus was telling this story to people who were familiar with shepherding, and even they were confused. So you can imagine today how much more difficult that passage becomes. I mean, really, what do we know about sheep, shepherds? I don't know about you, but my last encounter with a shepherd was at a birthday party for Jesus celebration at my church. And each year, my husband, myself, and our 2 young girls were dressed for a nativity scene photo. We donned angel wings and bathrobes, and one of us would wrap a towel around our head, hold a cane, ready to hook any wandering sheep. Precious photos, I want to tell you, but not so good for truly understanding shepherds. Hopefully your image of the Good Shepherd is not one of Jesus with a towel on his head, wearing a bathrobe, and sweetly holding a sheep. The reality for shepherds at the time of Jesus was that they faced danger and they offered protection. Their lives were as vulnerable as that of their sheep. They weren't in comfortable warm beds, but out in all types of weather. Their families, left without male protection, were also vulnerable. Vulnerability is a word that Jesus knew well. From a baby born of an unwed mother trying to find shelter for the birth, to an uncredentialed wanderer, to a crucified man without a tomb, his own tomb to be buried in. Vulnerability is a word that Jesus invites us towards. Brene Brown has a popular TED Talk podcast on vulnerability. Brown says the myth of vulnerability is that it means weakness. Actually, vulnerability requires us to take courageous risks of letting our true selves be deeply seen, of loving wholeheartedly with no guarantees, of practicing gratitude and joy, and perhaps most importantly, Brown believes vulnerability requires courage, compassion for self and others, and connection. Courage, compassion, connection. As we recognize the importance of being vulnerable to family, friends, and even God's grace, perhaps we can examine the value of vulnerability in our ministries together. Several people have shared that Sunday Forum has provided a space for them to risk sharing their thoughts, their hopes, concerns, and more. A space where they have felt heard and seen. We know that worship has been a place for deeply felt prayers to be shared and testimonies of God's presence in love offered. Are there places where vulnerability is harder? How can we build this into life together? In today's passage, Jesus contrasts his voice with that of thieves and bandits. These false voices are attractive because they let us bypass the harder work of discernment and needed action. It's easier and it feels safer to hold on to the ego rather than the challenging, countercultural truth. There is a PBS Frontline episode called The Persuaders. I encourage you to view if you have not seen it. This show is about the changing nature of advertising. No longer are ad agencies trying to promote a better product. We used to hear about products that are lighter, brighter, stronger, right? Now products are all pretty darn good. So by the 1990s, it was no longer an issue of what the product did. Recognizing people's desire for fulfillment and purpose, in other words, the abundant life. At a time civic institutions and schools and churches were failing, the ad agencies went to emotional branding, using advertising to create meaning and identity and even a culture. A certain kind of life could be had by buying a specific product. As we know all too well, advertising is a multi-billion-dollar industry that is desperate to get our attention. One ad woman was taught, consumers are like roaches. You spray them and you spray them, and after a while it doesn't work anymore. So ads have to get louder, more manipulative, more present. And I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when I heard that families forego visits to Disneyland and the Grand Canyon to attend a Saturn Car Family Homecoming event. It may not be good advertising, but it's effective. It capitalizes on the need to belong. In fact, marketing companies studied cults to find out why people join. Of course, the stuff we buy does not actually fulfill our needs. The deep hunger continues. So then more ads tell us that we need more stuff, new stuff, better stuff, and we've got the wrong stuff, or we would have the emotional connection, the mystery, the freedom, the joy that we seek and are promised. Let's just call those voices thieves who steal real life, robbers of God's abundance. I recently heard Jonathan Crawford speak about the concept of enough. In his darling Aussie accent, he says, enough is the truth that we need to learn. We need to practice living enough, plenty, a sense of abundance that does not mean wealth. He says that enough is expressed in material terms, so we have enough stuff, enough food, not a lot of things that we're told we need, but life is good. And in fact, the reality of enough is that when you're there, it's better than too much. Too much, and life begins to diminish. Enough is where we're meant to be. A place of too little is not good for the soul, and nor is too much. I recently saw an old Mary Tyler Moore episode and was shocked at how little they had in their homes 40 years ago. No computers, videos, few appliances. Yet at that time, it was enough. How do we know when we have enough? Do we listen to the thieves and bandits who want to cheat us of real abundance by offering cheap and quick substitutions? Or do we find quiet places to listen for the voice of the Good Shepherd who said, I have come that you may have life and have it more abundantly. Follow my voice, my way. Only when we recognize the voice of the Good Shepherd and accept the gift of abundant life can we then offer it to others. We then become the hands of the Good Shepherd today, that like Tyrell are ready to take the crown off of our own head and offer it to another. An action that conveys God's words to the other, my purpose here is that you may have life and have it more abundantly. This could be a powerful exchange for marriage vows or renewals. I am here in this relationship so that you may have life and have it more abundantly. Isn't this exchange of abundant life what happens in the beautiful setting of Costa Rica? This week, let's contemplate who God might be wanting us to truly see in a new way, to be vulnerable with, to offer wholehearted love, and to share God's joy with. Together, may we create a community of enough, a community where abundant life is visible and offered in unexpected ways to a world in need of a good shepherd.